As far as I recall, I think we were talking about the process and the difficulties of getting published. And Drusilla Majestic came up with the idea of an anthology because she thought it would also be good training in editing and looking at other people's work critically.
They choose the content, and that content is chosen without knowing the names of any of the contributors from a year's worth of work that students submit. They make all the editorial decisions. They come up with the title of the journal. They talk about covers with the designers. They edit the work, and then they're responsible for the launch or multiple launches sometimes. They're really responsible for the full process.
It was definitely more than I expected. It's not just being an editor in the committee, it's also taking on marketing, taking on social media, PR, and working kind of throughout the whole year, throughout the publishing process.
It was so fascinating to see the breadth of talent that UTS has, and that's available for UTS students. And it was just absolutely fantastic to be able to read all of that and see that.
Yeah, it was so exciting to find out that the work was accepted. I feel like with writing, a lot of the time you're kind of writing something by yourself in your room. Often not that many people read what you've written, so the fact that I'd written these stories that were going to be published in a book was very exciting. Yeah, I can't wait for it to come out.
I do remember one memorable launch. It was this one actually, I think. What You Do and Don't Want. One of the students who'd published a piece, Sam Twyford Moore, had written a piece that referenced the author Frank Morehouse. So I invited Frank Morehouse to see if he'd come and launch it, and thinking he absolutely wouldn't. But he did.
Oh my God!
Oh, I thought this was only going to be electronic.
Oh my God!
Oh, present. Thank you.
Oh, wow.
That's you, babe. Amazing.
Look at that.
Now it is, and so it's the edition.
I ran writing workshops out at Eastwood Public School, and a student enrolled in year 4, I think, there, and continued studying writing with me through to year 12, and then came here to UTS. And where is she? And in here she's late for lunch. What I'm seeing is that I am among friends in this one. I feel connected with both of these. Thank you.
The UTS Writers Anthology continues to be one of the most exciting public displays of the outstanding student works that emerge from FAS's world-class writing program. And I'm immensely proud to be here to witness the celebration of its 40-year history.
How great is that? It's fantastic. Good evening, everyone. My name is Anna Funder, and I'm your MC this evening. On behalf of the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences and the Creative Writing Department at UTS, welcome. I'm thrilled and really honoured to be here as MC as we celebrate the 40th anniversary of the UTS Writers Anthology and the important place of the UTS Creative Writing Program and its journal in Australian writing history. Tonight, we are launching not one, but 2 editions of the anthology. 40, a collection of the best writing from 4 decades of the UTS anthology, and Bloom, the journal's 35th edition. I'd also like to say just how thrilling it is to be here in a room in real life with real people. I think this might be the first, if not one of the first times that people have been able to gather like this since lockdown. So it's really lovely. I'd like now to call please on Auntie Glendra, UTS Elder in Residence, who's going to give the acknowledgement to country. Thank you, Auntie Glenda.
It's exciting. Oh, this is really exciting to be here. Yesterday I was invited to the Honours Students celebration and I just assumed it was a Zoom, so I didn't come in. So I can't tell you how excited I am to be here. So poor little Charlotte, that I'd given a lot of my mother's beautiful handwork to, and she's done an honours in fashion, was expecting me to be there to show me some of her works. And I said, I'm looking for the Zoom. I can't find the Zoom, darling. And she goes, oh, it's an in-person one. So you're lucky I got here. So I'm really honoured to be here. And like Anna said, it is lovely to see people face to face. I just can't wait till I can start hugging people. And congratulations, young one. I saw you in the video. Yalamandu Marang Galindara. Yalamandu Marang is welcome in my language, and Galindara is my name that my father gave me. I think I had an Aboriginal name before it was trendy to have an Aboriginal name. So Glendra is the English translation. It's hard enough to get around Glendra. I have once been called Slender, which now I might pass for, but never back then. So yes, I'm honoured to have an Aboriginal name. So I am the Elder in Residence and really honoured and privileged to be part of UTS. UTS is a very special place. It believes in diversity, it wraps its arms around everyone, and it gives people a really good chance to be the best people they can be. So I'm honoured to be here. I would like to acknowledge and pay respects to the traditional owners, on the traditional owners of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and say thanks for allowing us to be here. It is upon their ancestral lands that the University of Technology is built. As we share our knowledge, teaching, learning and research practice within this university, may we all pay respects to the knowledge embedded forever within the Aboriginal custodianship of country. I also pay respects to elders past and acknowledge their struggles and strengths so that we can have opportunities not afforded to them. And one of those opportunities is higher education. Also honour present elders and our young ones who are so proud and respectful, and they are sharing our hopes and dreams. I can't do an acknowledgement without thanking our non-Indigenous brothers and sisters who walk beside us on this journey of collaboration, are supportive and respectful. Social justice and equal partnerships with us all. I too share the hopes and dreams that Australia will work together, an inclusive country that looks after most vulnerable, our past, and is recognised, and we walk together side by side. I had cataract surgery and I can't see very well anymore, but I can still write really crappily. So I've lost a lot of my skills and I can still sew just because I set that little machine into the path of the machine and it hums away and you can't really miss it because it's stuck there. So in this unusual time, writing's played a really important part in my life, and I'm sure it's played a really important part in your life, because it's something that hasn't been taken away from me yet. So yes. And like I said, I'm really honoured to be here, and you know, amongst such amazing young minds. And some not so amazing, I mean, some amazing older minds. So yeah, 40 years, it's amazing. You know, I said to Andrew, and welcome Andrew, and congratulations. We are in good hands with you. I've got a very good bullshit detector. Ooh. So 40 years, I've been supporting the Stolen Generations for 40 years, and it's a long time, and sometimes it's a battle with a few bumps on the road. So it's a credit. Anything that's 40 years is a long time, and it's a big journey. So congratulations and welcome back, everyone. And I'm so glad I remembered to come. Thank you. And thank you to young James for my beautiful gift. Where is he? He's got this fabulous pink suit on. Oh, thank you, darling. Did I get your name right? Oh, thank you. Thanks, everyone. Wait on, I'm lost.
Thank you so much, Auntie Glendra. I would also like to pay my respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the Buru Barongal people of the Darug Nation, the Bidiagal people and the Gamaigal people, upon whose unceded ancestral lands this university stands, and also acknowledge elders both past and present as the traditional custodians of knowledge for these lands. Storytelling in the most vital and profound forms has been taking place here for millennia. It's such a pleasure to be back here. I extend also a warm welcome from the faculty to those joining us here in this room. Professor Vice-Chancellor Andrew Parfitt, Deputy Vice-Chancellors Glenn Whitewick and Glenn Babington, and to the many writers, staff, supporters, and readers of the UTS Creative Writing Program here tonight. I think that's everyone. Also, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to those of you who are joining via our web link, wherever you are in the world. Tonight is a night of really great celebrations. I'd like to congratulate both the editorial teams of Bloom, that is Kismet Fawcett, Max Wilde. Max Wilde was a name around our dinner party last night. It was like voted the best writer's name ever. Morna, sorry everybody else, including me. Morna Ceres, Natia Santos, Sarah Furlan and Talia Horowitz. And of 40, Zora Ali, Riley Keir, Charlie Malicon, Callan McNeilage, Cecilia Ritchie and Claire Hsu. Not only have these editorial teams produced the publications, but they've also organised and produced tonight's event, so thank you. And tonight is really a total treat. We're going to hear Delia Faulkner on the history of the anthology, 2 readings from Bloom, and a panel discussion from some of the authors and mentors of 40. At this point, I would like to invite the Vice-Chancellor up to the stage to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Anna, and to everybody, welcome. Welcome to a very special event. Thank you to Auntie Glendra for the acknowledgement of country. It's such an important thing for us to do. This is Aboriginal land. It always was, always will be. And we acknowledge that. We also celebrate Indigenous knowledges. That's an integral part of what we are and our very being here. But there's an important other connection tonight, and that, of course, is storytelling. Because storytelling is so important, and I've heard it so many times from my Indigenous colleagues about the role that telling stories has in preserving culture, in conveying culture, and making us really aware of the place and connections that we have. That storytelling is really an integral part as well of the way in which we communicate our being in many ways in our society these days. Sometimes we think we've lost the art of that, but think how many times that a story has captured our imagination and drawn us to a conclusion that we might not have otherwise reached. That's why I think when we talk about a University of Technology, we turn our minds initially to the technology component. But of course, technology is just an enabler. We do a lot of work here at UTS in developing new technologies, in deploying new technologies, but technologies are only as good as the way in which they're used. And if they're enabling anything, how wonderful is it that they're enabling innovation, creativity, thoughtful debate? The very essence of what a university is about is where ideas clash, where ideas are tested, where ideas come through better than when they started in the debate. And storytelling is such an important part of that process as well. So the place of this program in the University of Technology is absolutely critical. Preserving the capacity to be able to tell stories, to convey meaning, to challenge ideas is really at the heart of the university. And it's terrific that this program is so well regarded in the community more widely and is recognised as just a part of what we do. So we're very proud of the writers who study with us, the writers who work here, the writers who form part of the wider community of connections that we have and the work that they do. It's an important art that we need to continue and will continue to have a fundamental place here at the university, sitting alongside the many other things that we do, whether they are in engineering and science and business, whether they're in creative industries more broadly. We're also celebrating the 40th anniversary of the Writers Anthology. And for those of you even partially numerate, 40 years is longer than UTS has actually existed as a university. So it's another important thing to remember tonight, and that is the importance of connections and our roots and our foundations and the antecedent organisations that brought UTS to the place that it is today. So celebrating 40 years is a terrific achievement. It shows not only endurance, but the fact that this is an activity, an artifact, a collection of stories to be celebrated and regarded as essentially a strand through UTS's history. The anthology itself, of course, is the work of many hardworking staff and students, and Anna's already acknowledged that and has acknowledged the people who've worked on the production. These are terrific points of engagement for us, and really to launch this and to celebrate it in the Great Hall at this particular time after a long period of not being able to get together is such a gift. I hope you really do enjoy tonight's function. Congratulations again to everybody who put the anthology together. Let's look forward to the next 40 years.
Thank you very much, Vice Chancellor. I love the idea of another 40 years. It sounds fantastic. I'm going to say a few words of my own about my association with the UTS and about writing. I can never pass up a kind of trapped audience, but I won't be too long. It's a particular pleasure for me to be hosting this event because my own association with the creative writing process program at UTS goes back a very long way. I have been haunting the halls here since 2004, when I began a doctorate that then became the novel All That I Am. I worked then in, it was before the renovations, in literally a windowless broom cupboard in this tower building upstairs, which I was very grateful for and passionately loved. I think of myself then as a creature of this place, sort of like a golem, or maybe like a possum in the attic. In any event, ineradicable, because I'm still here. After a few periods of maternity leave and an overseas defection, I was proud to be named a UTS Luminary. And while I was overseas, I was also proud to be able to represent the UTS's interests when I lived in the States. But even before moving here to Sydney and beginning to work with the UTS, I was aware and slightly in awe of the reputation of this writing program. It's such a place of energy and industry and serious engagement with both writing and with the world, as we see here, I suppose, in these anthologies. And I'd seen the anthology reviewed nationally, and I was aware of how the program had nurtured extraordinary writers. There's way too many to name, but one of them I just saw up there, like the extraordinary Jillian Meers. So tonight I'm just going to say a couple of things about my own writing practice as I developed it in the cupboard upstairs. And I suppose the first thing I wanted to talk about was getting over one's sense of awe and finding your own voice. The second thing I'm going to talk about is metaphorical thinking. So when you start writing, I think this is quite a common experience, you've got no idea if your work will seem good to anyone apart from you. Though my early work is stuffed up in my own attic and I can neither throw it away nor look at it, I know that it would never have made it, for instance, into these anthologies. I hadn't yet found my voice. But thinking about learning how to write made me think of how I did learn. One of the children I had while I was haunting the tower upstairs is now learning to drive. So most of my metaphors at the moment are driving metaphors. You have to forgive that. It's just what I've got lying around to hand. So when learning to write, instructions like those for driving a car are possibly helpful. So notes on point of view, framing the story or the moment, big picture and small picture detail, and so on. But I don't think about those things anymore when I'm writing. I can drive a car without thinking, or not very much. And even though I wouldn't go so far as to say I can write without thinking, I can pretty much write without the instructions. And that is because there's something that I've been learning to do automatically, a bit like driving. But the most important thing that you learn is what's called finding a voice. This is something that happens in the process of doing the writing, because it's in writing that you uncover your particular slant on the world and the verbal tone that suits your point of view. You discover, in short, the writing you. So in the 40 years of the UTS's writing anthology so far, the reader is really privileged to witness this process in emerging writers, finding their voice. I can remember being surprised at the voice that I found was mine, which sounds counterintuitive, but we say finding a voice instead of choosing one, precisely because it's not totally a choice. The field is not as open as you might think. You are you, after all. You are, I'm talking about myself, the resources that you have to hand, personality, experience, verbal facility, heart, and ear. As much as we might write about things outside of us, it's our writing selves, once we find them, that we bring to the material. The UTS program has attracted a wide variety of diverse and talented writers to it, I think precisely because of the sophistication and depth of the teaching faculty. Here, there are no cookie cutters, there are no gurus. You can, and you will, and you do, and you probably have found your voice. The other thing I'd like to talk about is about the importance of metaphorical writing, because I think that metaphor is really at the heart of literary writing. We describe one thing in terms of another in order to see each of the two things anew. David Mitchell, an author I admire, the author of Cloud Atlas, when asked what imagination is, said, Imagination is a metaphor generator that makes unobvious connections. And he described inspiration as a connection so unobvious, you don't know how you made it. Metaphor, large and small, is the start and the art of fiction writing. You can learn to drive a car to take you somewhere, or here you can learn to wield a point of view to take you somewhere else. Writing can hold things together like a mirror holding them up to the world so differently. This afternoon, I held a mirror up to what I was thinking. I'm going to share it with you. So I held it up to street sleepers and tech titans and brave graces called tame, to stolen children and newly discovered planets, to pygmy peoples and human mules, to deforestation while villa woods bloom, to cloud seeding, to coke snorting racehorses, to islands drowning and children being born, to being left, to being found, to stopping time. That is what a metaphor or metaphors can do. I'm not alone in feeling the wonder of hearing voices quicken and steady in these anthologies. Writers such as Nam Lee, James Bradley, Malcolm Knox, Fiona McGregor, Deborah Adelaide, Alison Whitaker, Keredwin Dovey, Mireille Juchot, and Melissa Lukashenko in her introduction to 40, have each found the same sense of excitement and wonder in looking at the voices that are contained in these anthologies. So, in fact, have reviewers. The eminent reviewer Karen Goldsworthy notes that the quality of the journal has always been high. Geordie Williamson, writing in The Australian, says that one of the virtues of a journal like this, the equivalent of an artistic group show, if you like, is that, in his words, we have a stake in the text as it proceeds. I think that's because we all, as Australians and as readers, have a stake in the development of new Australian voices. I'd like to finish by quoting Melissa Lukashenko's wonderful introduction to 40. She says, "Growing up in Brisbane in the early 70s, I scarcely even realised in my youth that Australians could be authors. There was the remarkable Alan Marshall, who I loved, and also Kath Walker. But Dick and bloody Dora definitely ruled the classroom," she writes. "And of the thousands of texts in the narrow, long rectangle that was the Mount Gravatt Central Public Library, only a tiny minority were by Australians. I'll never forget," she writes, "the distinct physical shock I felt as a child when I first read a sentence about Acacia Ridge, a nearby suburb, in a book. Collections like this one," she says, "from UTS students who know they can be authors and who set out to become writers in a very deliberate way, are part of why the literary landscape is so different to that of 50 years ago. So different and so much more wonderful." It's now my pleasure to introduce you Dr. Delia Faulkner, Senior Lecturer at UTS. Delia is one of Australia's most admired writers. She's the author of 4 books, including this year the truly brilliant essay collection sparked by her response to living through this age of the Anthropocene. It's called Signs and Wonders, Dispatches from a Time of Beauty and Loss. We are so fortunate to have Delia here at UTS. In addition to her writing and teaching, Delia has also worked as the academic lead on numerous anthologies. Tonight, she's going to speak about the history of the anthology and its vital place in the Australian literary landscape. Thank you, Delia.
Thanks, Anna. At the risk of being repetitious, it's wonderful to be celebrating here tonight in real life and to see so many people here from the UTS family, past and present, who have contributed to the Writers Anthology over 40 years. The anthology's first issue, Pink Cakes, appeared in 1982 when the University of Technology Sydney was still the New South Wales Institute of Technology. It has appeared with a few small gaps almost every year since, and has established itself, as one critic wrote in The Australian, as an integral part of our literary ecology. The editors of that first issue wrote that it was born out of a reluctance to accept the bleak situation of fiction publishing with its small markets, high costs, and the domination by international companies unwilling to gamble with new and untried writers. They noted, and this is a quote, the satisfaction of controlling all the decisions that are made in every phase of production, right down to the typeface. Now, while the fortunes of Australian publishing have risen and fallen, and risen, I hope, over the decades, these satisfactions continue for our current editors. The UTS Writers Anthology played its part in creating big changes to the local and national writing scene from the beginning. Editors of the early volumes contributed to the legendary Writers in the Park, a platform for live readings at the Harold Park Hotel, which many of you will remember in Glebe, that predates even the Sydney Writers' Festival, which didn't begin until 1997. Realism was still the dominant flavour of Australian writing as the anthology began, but from the earliest days, its loyalties pointed towards the new and iconoclastic, on the flow between academic and creative work. In his introduction to the 1987 issue, creative writing lecturer Stephen Mukey observed that there were two paths available to local writers: to study literature at Sydney University and publish with venerable houses like Angus and Robertson, or to read work at the Harold Park Hotel in the spirit of the Balmain push. In its early editions, and especially in the 80s, when international luminaries like Jean Baudrillard were coming into town as part of Sydney's big theory moment, postmodernism and playful postmodernism inflects the writing. By 1991, UTS creative writing graduate, the late and wonderful Jillian Meers, would note in her introduction to the anthology that what also seems remarkable is the willingness of these writers to leapfrog over many of the normal literary conventions. Some put a few double twists into their leap. Reading the stories from 35 issues is like opening a sequence of time capsules from which the compressed atmosphere of a time and place bursts back out. Heroin washes through those 80s and 90s stories. So do beer, sea view champagne, inner city doorsteps, wicker chairs in share houses, and cigarette butts in the Monstera Deliciosa. E-commerce and emails appear for the first time in 2004, along with designer underwear and emails. Veganism in 2005, and how things change. In a story published in 2000, someone asks for a double decaf soy latte in a cafe, and the waiter says, certainly not. And of course, more traditional writing never went away either, with so many accomplished works of realism in the journal over the years, along with the occasional short film script and of course poetry. The compass of the early stories, especially about those about war or migration, points to Europe. Around the turn of the millennium, you can watch it swing closer to home as pieces begin to be set in South America, Vietnam, Japan, the Pacific Islands, India, South Africa, and East Timor, as Australia itself becomes more open and dynamic. Non-fiction becomes a regular part of the anthology around 2013 as creative non-fiction starts to boom around the world. The alumni of the anthology are impressive, and I can see many of those faces actually in the audience now. They've included Beth Yarp, MTC Cronin, Toby Fitch, Isabel Lee, Alison Whittaker, John Connell, Rachel Ward, Ashley Sinnott, and Damien Lovelock, to name just a handful. And then there are the rising stars. Emily Brugman, selected for the 2000 anthology, will publish her Vogel Award shortlisted novel, The Islands, next year. And you'll meet more of these past contributors later tonight. But not all writers, even those who are well established today, come out of the gates fully fledged or filled with confidence. When I was a student in the early 80s at UTS, I lived my life on the edge of fright. Jillian Meers, who had won the Vogel Award the year before and had been invited to contribute the introduction to the 1991 edition featuring star alumni. Many fears ruled me, she writes, Perhaps my most abiding apprehension grew out of the sense of writing talent all around, and correspondingly of drowning beneath that quality, of never surfacing, of lingering too long in that comfortable but untimely, ultimately frustrating cocoon of the potential writer, capital P, capital W. But the point of the UTS Writers Anthology has always been about something bigger. As Nam Lee would point out in his introduction to the 2010 edition, I Can See My House from Here, writing and reading are so essentially private. There is a place for celebration and community, like tonight. There's also a place for finding your voice, that difficult process that Anna's spoken about so beautifully tonight. There is a public perception, I think, that creative writing courses are about creating cookie cutter writers who all write to some kind of agenda of sameness, whereas the process is actually very much the opposite. In her introduction to the 2012 edition, novelist and non-fiction writer Fiona McGregor would write, "Testament to the teaching at UTS is the willingness and ability of all these writers to apply themselves to such a variety of form and voice, as well as the fact that the writing is not blurred with polish into sameness, genericized by an overemphasis on craft." Anna has mentioned the spectacular range of writers who've been happy to endorse the UTS Writers Anthology in their introductions, including, of course, Anna herself. While all acknowledge the vivid talents on display, one theme rings loudly: the importance of such courses and anthologies as nurturing spaces for writers. In her introduction to the 1994 edition, Jan Hutchinson would note that when I was first a bewildered writing student at UTS, I was struck, and still am, by the care that is shown towards new writers and their writing. It's a consideration that exists outside preciousness, and yet within the confines of something almost as old-fashioned as respect. As part of the program for, I think, 16 years now, I can only add that this has been my experience too, of endless delight and surprise at the inventiveness, goodwill, and bravery of the writers I've worked with, who, no matter what they've gone on to do after UTS, have left with a sense of the importance of creative communities and their own powers of invention. As a teacher, I'm also very aware of those past writing staff who contributed to the program and the success of the anthology over the years. To Drusilla Majeska, Stephen Mukey, Jan Hutchinson, Amanda Laurie, Judith Beveridge, the late Graham Williams and late Glenda Adams, Gabrielle Carey, Anthony Macris, John Dale, who I can see in the audience here tonight, and Tony I can see, and Deborah Adelaide, who will speak later, and Claire Corbett. The anthology remains as we all pass through. So thank you to our wonderful volunteer editors for your hard work and dedication. And I'm going to join everyone else in saying here's to the next 40 years. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Delia. It's great to have that overview. And I mean, we could be here all night with a roll call of extraordinary writers and teachers. I know we're only mentioning some of them. But now we're going to hear from some of the very newest ones, two readers from this year's anthology, Bloom, who will be introduced by members of this year's Editorial Committee, Natia Santos and Max Wilde. Natia is in the final year of her creative writing degree at UTS. She's word obsessed and loves poetry in all forms. Max Wilde enjoys editing film and written works, but he's not quite sure what he wants to do after he leaves UTS. At the moment, his tentative career plan is to be simultaneously a famous film editor, a great book editor, and a psychologist. Please welcome Natia and Max.
Hi, my name is Natia, and I'm thrilled to be announcing the first reader from the 2021 anthology, Bloom. This creative nonfiction piece is filled with stunning prose and inspired our committee to read all of the books referenced. Lily Cameron is a writer and editor based in Sydney's Inner West. She is a UTS Master of Arts student, recipient of the Allen and Unwin Creative Writing Grant, and winner of the Inner West Council 2020 Young Writer Award. Please welcome Lily, reading from her piece, Finding Meaning in the In-Between.
Thank you, Natia. This is just the beginning of the essay, Finding Meaning in the In-Between. When I dissect my body, pull apart layers of skin and sinew, tear limb from limb and place each specimen under the light, I see I'm made of many gendered parts. My legs have hair on them, dark and thin, blonde at the tips. Skin may be made up and definitely sunscreened. Fingernails short for sex, music, maybe sport. Long limbs and slightly hunched shoulders. The formation of gender is societal, arbitrary, fabricated. I think this is why Frankenstein's monster engages me so. These many gendered body parts and many gendered words can help us explore the constraints and limitations of language when it comes to the construction of meaning on issues of gender and sexuality. Mary Shelley knew Frankenstein would ring true with readers, writing in the preface of a republication, "What terrified me will terrify others." This fear of being misunderstood, misrepresented, incorrectly stitched together. This is why these new words and new ways of speaking captivate us. In her book, The Argonauts, Maggie Nelson says the answer doesn't lie in creating new language, although she acknowledges the power and pragmatism in doing so. She says that there is no cure. For what? Dysphoria, disgust, confusion. In a queer utopia, would we have a word for every iteration of gender or none? After all, there are a limitless number of words for gender diverse identities around the world. When placed side by side, all these words form something like a quilt, threaded by protest or prayer. Boy, running stitch, skip, faggot, running stitch, sister girl, loop on, two-spirit. Is it some quilt or rather a poem, a travesty, a warrior, fafa fine, feminiello? I know it's possible. Sappho created her own language to explore her love and lust, so much so that the love was named after her. This mortal muse, a myth weaver, honey-voiced, who lived and died over 2,000 years ago. Only one of her poems remains in its entirety, the rest of her words lost, eaten away. In If Not, Winter, poet and essayist Anne Carson has collected the fragments that remain and called attention to the missing pieces, using square quotes to connote the ambiguity and absence that comes with illegibility. This silent space between brackets creates a new poem entirely, one where the reader can imagine all that is left unsaid or forgotten, a new language that is not Greek or English or even anything in between. When Anne Carson created a frame for Sappho's words and slotted them in, carefully, intentionally, she created a shared language that spans lost books, exiles, and death. Reading these fragments, I remember Sappho like a many-gendered mother, and I don't feel so alone. I don't want to be buried. Thinking of burial makes my throat tight, like the taste of light cheese. But if I imagine my gravestone, I imagine it reading, daughter, sister, ... I call my not woman lover my queen when they do something worthy of an accolade. I remember girlhood fondly with all its quick growing limbs and late nights, and love the feeling of the word woman in my mouth. How can I decry the end of gender while also loving mine? Bodies are not simply made up of blood and bone and organs. They are historically, socially, and even linguistically formed. If, as Monique Wittig suggests, the language you speak is made up of words that are killing you, womanhood and queerhood are indeed limited by a language that was not designed with us in mind. While we think of dictionaries as holders of all linguistic truths, they were written by people, men, with their own biases. This is perhaps most easily illustrated with the definition of suffragette, originally defined by men who opposed its very existence with the quote, screeching, childless, and husbandless sisterhood. Consider also pederasty, sexual inversion, tribadism, similisexualism, terms used to belittle or criticize a range of non-hegemonic sexualities. The language we speak is made up of words that are killing us. I sometimes feel I am playing at woman, a person with hair just so and a kind of shivering frustration deep in my veins. And more than that, playing queer woman, femme but not femme enough, not quite spoken into existence. S.M. Gilbert asks of women, is her body a linguistic term in male language? Does her body express or repress a female language of its own? I wonder what that language would sound like if we could listen to it. I think it would sound like feminists in Spain rejecting grammatical gender and creating words out of symbols instead of letters. It would sound like Virginia Woolf calling her body a monster and miracle in one breath, writing Orlando, a whole book where her lover morphs from man to woman to hero or heroine in between. It would sound like the voices of femme fatales, wicked witches, jealous goddesses, and bitches. It would sound like the space in between words, silent and still and full. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Max, the one with Wilde as my last name, and I'm so glad it was a topic of conversation for you last night. That's really great. I'm really excited to be announcing Morna as our next reader from Bloom. Morna has been writing since late 2017 and nothing has stopped her since. In 2018, Morna was awarded the Verona Residency Fellowship, and in 2020, she was shortlisted for the Penguin Literary Prize. On top of these achievements, Morna has been an absolute joy to work with alongside both a writer as an editor on Bloom. And her piece of fiction has an incredibly unique voice, and I think many people will find it hits close to home. So please welcome Morna, reading from her piece, The Sleeping Giant.
The Sleeping Giant. Once upon a time, I lay on a cat. No, I lay on a mat with a cat. Oh, come on. The cat lay on the mat. I did not lie on the mat. Now there is a dog I lie on the mat with. Or rather, I lie on the bed with the dog, for there is no mat. Anyway, I lie on the bed with the dog and a man knocks on the door. Actually, it is a man and a woman. They knock on my door and ask to see my dog. I call my dog, and because he is my dog, the dog comes running. Hello, I say to my dog. Woof, woof, says the dog, wagging his tail for the man and the woman standing at the door. This is my dog, I say. The man and the woman begin to cry. They cry an old grief I understand from long ago, and before I know it, I cry too. I cry for them, I cry for myself. We're all crying, and the dog begins howling. That's when they ask if they can have my dog. Sure you can have my dog, I say. After all, they look like they could do with a cuddle. The man and the woman take my dog, who happily follows them down the hallway and into the lift. I shut the door, walk into the bedroom, and look at my bed. My dog is gone. I run to the door, I run down the hall, I run into the lift, and I hit the ground button, thinking I will scream for my dog. No, I won't actually scream for my dog because it's not something I would do, but I do breathe erratically. I try to think what breathing erratically might look like, and as the lift descends, I observe myself in the mirror. I could have been an actor, I am so convincing. Anyway, the door opens and I run. I run through the lobby, past an empty desk, and through the automatic door into a day one would describe as indescribable. Because the sun is shining, because there is no wind, because there is a flight of birds overhead, because I'm outside, because I'm free. I could stop and think about this, about being free, but instead I remember I am looking for my dog. But there is no dog. All I can think of is me lying on the mat with the dog, no, on the bed with the dog. I look up and down the street and see a car idling at the light. The car is black. There is a number plate, AGR 365, and through the back window of the car with the number plate, AGR 365, there he is, my dog, and he's looking straight at me. And even though I cannot hear him, of course I can't, he's in a car with the windows wound up maybe 30 meters away, I see he is barking. My dog is barking, help, help, help. I run. Yes, I run the fastest I have ever run in my life. I am a woman. I am an old woman. I have not run for years. And as I run, my chest expands and I see possibility in this running, running for my life, running for the life of my dog. But the car is driving off, turning to the right, or is it the left? And as I think about this, the number plate, precariously balanced on the tip of a brain cell, topples over and disappears. Is it ABR or AGD or CBD? No, CBD stands for something else. It stands for Central Business District. It is definitely not the Central Business District I am looking for. No, it is my dog. And my dog is in a car, a black car with a number plate, and I cannot remember. I look around, trying to recall why I'm here. There must be a reason. There's always a reason, and it is probably a very good reason, probably. But then I see the park. And oh my, isn't it a pretty park? Trees reaching into the sky so high, I cannot bend my head back far enough to see the top of them. Something in me aches. I need to go inside the park. So I step on the road just as a car makes a terrible noise and frightens me. The man in the car throws his arm out the window and shouts, "Watch where you're going, you stupid old woman. You watch where you're going yourself," I say. I continue across the road and walk into the park. People are everywhere. There is a girl on her phone lying under the sun in only her swimwear. Eskimo white skin with goose pimples all over her, and a group of friends eating lunch, chicken legs, bread, cheese, and boys throwing around a football. Not really boys, men, burly, thick-set, hairy legs, sweating, red-faced. And there, over there, there is a boy and girl necking. Necking? Is there such a word? Really, I mean kissing, but necking's nice too, and love bites and French kissing and tongues down throats and so on and so forth. I did them all once, although exactly when, I'm not sure, but I still feel it, the warmth, the touching of someone else, the touching of me. There is such happiness in this idea and being inside the park, and when I'm halfway across the green expanse, spongy grass between my toes, a butterfly circles around my head, and another, and before long, there are hundreds of butterflies, white, blue, tan, black spots, white spots, green trims. Oh, there is so much beauty in this world. Have I forgotten this? I start spinning with the butterflies, reaching out my arms, closing my eyes so I am one of them, spinning until I'm dizzy, so dizzy I have to lie down on the grass. I gaze up at the blue, reaching towards infinity, and something touches me. Another sky, another moment. Yes, there was such a sky in a park where I once lived. I am sure of it. And there are other sounds, familiar sounds, and a voice pouring honey over me, and fingers dragging a feather across my forehead. And I can't quite see who. And I want to. I want to. I want to. That's when the boy comes over. Thanks. I'm just going to put on my editor's cap for a moment, and I just want to say thank you to Dr. Claire Corbett for her incredible support on behalf of the Editorial Committee. She taught us a great deal, and she was a great support. And you know, I now know where commas go, kind of, semicolons, never, and I do know the difference between lie and lay. Thanks.
Thank you, Natia, Lily, Max, and Morna. That was wonderful. I'm now going to hand over to UTS alumnus and author Sam Twyford Moore, who's going to lead our panelists, who are UTS Honorary Associate Dr. Deborah Adelaide and contributors from 40, Patty Miller, Zahid Gamildian, and Sydney Koo. So Sam Twyford Moore is the author of The Rapids, Ways of Looking at Mania, published by New South in Australia and the University of Toronto Press internationally. He's a former festival director and CEO of the Emerging Writers Festival, and he currently programs the Faber Writing Academy for Allen and Unwin. His second book, A Popular History of Australian Actors, will be out next year. His story, Phimosis, I'm not sure I said that correctly, appeared in the 2007 anthology and is also included in 40 Years of the UTS Writers Anthology. Sam.
Is Patty there? I'm just going to put on a stopwatch because we have half an hour, and I think this is the first time in human history that a panel of 5 has been attempted in half an hour. But I think we can achieve it. So thank you to Anna. I too would just like to acknowledge that we are here on unceded Gadigal land of the Eora Nations, country that has a 65,000-year history of art, culture and storytelling. I pay my respects to elders past and present, and thank you to Auntie Glendra for that wonderful acknowledgement of country. I am thrilled to be joined tonight for a panel discussion by 4 writers closely connected to the history of the UTS Anthology. I'm just going to introduce them, and maybe if you can put up your hand because you're not in the order of my notes. But Paddy Miller, whose story Pink Cakes was adopted as the name of the first anthology in 1982. Zahid Gameldon, whose story Looking into a Beechwoods Shack was featured in the 2007 anthology, What You Do and Don't Want. And of course, Zahid and I were cohorts. Sydney Koo, whose work I'm Not Lovin' It was featured in the 2018 anthology Light Borrowers. And they also had a piece appear in the 2019 anthology. And of course, for years, Deborah Adelaide, now Honorary Associate Professor at UTS, mentored students as they worked to put together the anthology each year. So this beautiful 40th anniversary edition is an elegiac book in many senses, marking the passing of a significant period of time. There are quite a few writers included within its pages who are sadly no longer with us. Amongst them is, of course, the iconic, brilliant Julian Mears, who is included in this anniversary edition with a story, Midnight Shift, which she published in 2000. I was, like many readers, I'm sure, absolutely floored by Bernadette Brennan's outstanding recent biography of Mears, and was delighted to find a description of Mears studying creative writing at UTS within its pages. Her then teacher, Drusilla Majeska, provided the clearest descriptions of what Mears brought to her classes in those early years. Majeska suggested to Brennan that Mears came to class with something like an erotic aura, going on to say it was visceral, erotic, it was unsettling, it touched something anarchic in the self. Now, I'm not suggesting we'll get anywhere near close to creating that aura tonight, and perhaps we shouldn't, but it was incredible to read the shared history which everyone on the stage shares tonight and has in common, and I'm sure many in the audience do too. We are, alas, becoming history. But speaking of history, I would love to start at the very start because we are so lucky to have Paddy here tonight. Because your story, Pink Cakes, was used as the title for the first UTS anthology in 1982, and you were also on the editorial committee that year. As Delia noted in her excellent history of the anthology, you and the other editorial team wrote that the anthology came out of a reluctance to accept the bleak situation of fiction publishing at the time. I'm wondering if you could talk about what it was like to work on that first collection and your experiences of that bleak situation in 1982.
Well, that's a long time ago, but I think the class was actually in 1980, as I recall, because that was the last year of the degree for me. But I think it really was Drusilla Majeska creating and driving that for us. And we were, I guess, just really excited to be part of that side of things, you know, the editing side of things. We had a kind of policy where even though we were allowed to submit, we weren't allowed to select or vote for our own stories. And everyone was just excited at that process of being able to be published in a collection. But looking at it now and looking at the production that is achieved now, I mean, we look so amateur, I think, but it was.
We got a quick shot of it and it looked quite punk. Like,
yes. I mean, I didn't even know it was going to be called Pink Cakes until I saw it, you know, and I was really excited for it, that it was called Pink Cakes, but it had you know, it's so sophisticated now, and there wasn't the same kind of technology then to produce those things, but it was the same enthusiasm and the love of the process as well, and the range of things too. It's really interesting to see the range of work even then.
Zahid, your piece was just so ahead of its time. It's been a real privilege to get to revisit it after all these years. You said you finished it at the end of 2006, and it was obviously published in 2007, which was really the end of the Howard era. And both you and I were studying under the last days of Howard. I think your piece really captures that time really well, and I'm wondering what brought it about and whether you had a sense of things ending at that time.
I'm not sure I had a sense of things ending at that time. I had the hope of things ending at that time, but it still felt far away when I was writing that piece. I think it was, you know, in the aftermath of the Cronulla riots and the Iraq war protests and all of that sort of stuff. So it feels in some ways like ancient history, but you know, as I was saying to you earlier, there's a part of me that longs for those days, because even though I didn't agree with much of what Howard was doing, I could see that he was driven by ideology in this, you know, nation building quest. And I didn't like the nation that he was building, but if you look at politics now, it's much blunter. And if you were to say something like Scott Morrison has a nation building project, I think you'd probably elicit laughs from a lot of people. So, you know, in some ways it feels like a relic, that story. But you know, I hope that it still has some relevance since it's being republished at this time.
Yeah, definitely. To bring us right to the contemporary moment, Sydney, your story is so wonderful and powerful and feels very alive in this current moment. You're also obviously the most recent graduate amongst us, and you appeared in 2 anthologies right before the world went into a series of lockdowns. I'm wondering if you could talk about your experience with these more recent anthologies and whether your fellow students knew of this history of the anthology and, yeah, just your experience.
I didn't know about this history until like 5 minutes ago. But I don't know if the experience I had in the editing process would be very different to how it is now, because most of what we did was by email, and I didn't meet my editor in person until one of these opening nights. So I think it would be quite a similar experience. I think it would be very different for the editors though on the editorial committee.
Yeah, definitely. Did you get a launch?
Yes.
Okay, you got the launch. Okay, you didn't go into lockdown.
Were we the last year before?
So, yeah. Lucky last. Deborah, you have played such a central role in the anthology for years. I'm wondering if you can first talk about where you think it sits in the wider industry. You know, Delia has referenced that Australian critic, mentioning it's an integral part of the literary ecology. Certainly, it seemed to me at the time that, you know, it's the rare student anthology that would be pretty regularly reviewed by the major newspapers, and I believe you actually reviewed it before you came on board to help it out. Can you talk a bit about where it stands?
Yeah, I used to do, funnily enough, the team from Fairfax is here tonight, and I used to work with someone called Fiona, who's here, who's working here at UTS now, who was my sub-editor for this book review column that I did every week, which still goes in the Sydney Morning Herald. And I did this for four and a half years, mainly thanks to Susan Wyndham, who's also here. And that was my very first introduction to the UTS writing program, apart from some inconsequential moments. But I think I reviewed 3 anthologies, and it was really clear from the first that I read that this was an outstanding kind of publication, and the actual quality, as Patty's mentioned, of the paper is better, the typefaces are better, the proofreading is vastly improved. So the physical books were still a little bit amateurish, but the quality of the writing was so outstanding. And I've you know, came to work to UTS and was involved in various capacities until I got to coordinate the one that I think you and Zahid were in 2007. And I think I got to do that because I was the only warm body in the room. So I got to be it. But I found it was the most wonderful experience. And I've thought over the years, I've often thought, why is the UTS Anthology such an outstandingly quality and a student anthology, and why has it persisted? Why are we celebrating, you know, the 40 years, as it were? So, and I think the answer to that, well, there are many answers to that, but I think the thing that stood out to me was the authenticity of the entire process. Everything about the process is totally authentic. The rigor, and I guess the other thing that has always intrigued me is student anthologies come and go from various universities, and there's usually a theme, but there's never been a theme for the UTS Anthology ever. And year after year, students would say to me, you know, well, what's the theme this year, so we know what to submit? And I said, well, there's no theme. And the other academic staff have answered the same questions, I think. And the theme is irrelevant, but there are themes that emerge. And you know, you've actually kind of talked a little bit about some of the political context from back in the day. So I'm not sure that I actually answered your question.
No, you did. I actually had 2 questions in there, and you answered both brilliantly, so thank you. Do you want? I think I know what you're going to ask.
Well, I was just saying, just as a side note, it's kind of terrifying that my piece is referred to as back in the day at this point.
Because I read that again recently, and I was struck by how fresh it is and how very much of the moment in all sorts of ways.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's just, it's in the anthology. You've got a copy, you've got to read it. I just did want to talk about the stories and the context around them because it's such a beautiful opportunity to get to do this. Paddy Pink Cakes is such an intricate and ornate story. I just want to know, do you remember what you were reading at the time that would have shaped it? And also just if there was a sense that fiction was the real driving impetus in those early years, because you've become such a leader of nonfiction, both in teaching and publishing work in that area.
You've done another double question there. No, I can't remember what I was reading, but it was most likely, you know, people like Doris Lessing, I would say, around that time, and probably Patrick White, so hence a little ornateness in it. And when I read it, that's what I thought. When I read it again after 40 years or whatever, that's what I thought. But I also thought, you know, the themes were that the theme of the kind of gap between your kind of one's idea or ideal about something and the reality of it was still there, and that's still something that fascinates me, the huge gap there is between our idea of something and what it's really like was really kind of something that still fascinates me. And I certainly was wanting to get to your second part of your question, to be writing fiction then. But really my first book, which came out probably in the early 90s, it was a mixture of fiction and non-fiction. And it was actually, it came out of that story that was about one of my great aunts. And all I knew about her was that she had wanted to be a nun once and wasn't. So in the book, The Last One Who Remembers, it explored the kind of imaginary lives of those great aunts, none of whom married. They were very unmarrying women. And I was just fascinated about what their lives were like. So the book came out of that story at UTS. In fact. Amazing.
Double questions aren't to trip anyone up. They're just to try and compact as much as possible within the time space. Zahid, the great Melissa Lukashenko seems to have agreed, at least with my assessment of the lasting quality of your story. She's highlighted in her brilliant foreword, and to quote directly from Melissa, you write about a woman being attacked, in this case openly, on a Sydney train. It's hard to convey the utter joy of discovering a character, a female character at that, who refuses to be cowed by those telling her to go back where she came from. I'm sort of directing you back to that time again, but can you talk about the kind of political urgency that seems to be driving this piece?
I suppose to me back then, it felt very personal, and I actually avoided reading this piece because I wrote it so long ago, and reading the early work really gives you a feeling of terror in the pit of your gut. But I went back to it this afternoon, and I remembered the events that kind of led up to it. And that section is actually based on something that happened, and it surprised me how personal a lot of this was, and how the personal was also political for me at that particular time. I suppose it still is, but it was more urgent at that moment in time, and I felt it more personally, that yearning to find an identity, to determine what it meant to be Australian. And to be honest, I'm not sure that I'm still capable of, divesting or divulging that much of myself at the moment on the page. So it was a really interesting thing to go back and experience kind of as a new reader, to connect with my younger self in that way.
Yeah, I get that sense of amnesia of, going back to stuff. Sydney, I'm Not Loving It is so great at exploring concepts of identity, whether cultural or based around sexuality, and which I'm actually sure is true of many of the pieces in this 40-year anniversary edition. Can you talk about what you were particularly looking to explore in that piece and how that came about?
I actually wrote this piece in Delia's class, creative nonfiction, and I hadn't written any creative nonfiction or nonfiction really before this. And I didn't think I could until Delia told us, write about something that you're an expert in. And I remember sitting there thinking, there's nothing that I'm an expert in. I don't know anything fully. I know like little bits of pieces, but I don't know anything fully. And she just kept weaving these little bits out of us. And I realized, well, I know about my sexuality really well. I don't know about all sexualities really well, but I know about mine. And it's interesting that you mentioned the cultural aspect of it, because I never think about the cultural aspects of my writing. It just appears in work and people tend to comment on it, which I find really interesting. But yeah, I wouldn't have written this piece if it weren't for Delia's class. So thank you, Delia.
It's such a great piece. I have to thank Delia as well, because I've got to keep on throwing to a brilliant introduction. Everyone's going to have a great time reading that, and I hope people seek out the anthology, almost just for that fantastic history. It's such a precise and textual job of tracing the influences across the decades on the various anthologies, whether it's Sydney having that big theory moment in the 1980s or external forces like the double decaf soy latte in 2000. Deborah, I'm wondering whether you could see during your time working on the anthology, a bearing of what was being taught to the students, or those kind of bigger external things that were out in the world. And perhaps that's a question that the group could follow up on as well.
I'm not entirely sure what you're asking me.
That was a bit of word soup.
Could I see themes?
I think in terms of that it sits separately to what is taught in individual subjects, but then it comes out, and can you see what is being taught? Because you also teach the subjects and teach reading and introduce people to reading and styles of writing, whether you could see that influence then going into the anthology, or were people just kind of doing their own thing?
No, I think it's fair to say that most of the pieces submitted have been produced in a class at some point and workshopped in class. So one of the reasons we have had the timetable we had for the anthology, which anyone who's been involved will know it's very tight, is it's the submissions come at the end of the year after students have finished all their work, because that's where the content of the anthology is always generated. So that's why we've always had a really tight production schedule. Essentially, for those of you who may not be aware of this, this book is produced in 6 months. So in the industry, a book will take at least a year, and that's done by professionals. So our UTS anthology has always taken 6 months from the start to its launch, which used to be at the Sydney Writers Festival in May, and done by a panel of basically amateurs who suddenly become thrown in at the deep end, editors. So now I've got off the track here, Sam, sorry. I did say I have really simple questions, so.
Never, it's not possible.
Because I've been a bit
not when you're trying to convince stuff. I suppose it could be a question that could open up to the.
Well, one thing I just would like to say is we've been really conscious, and I think the other academics who've been supervising this process have are also conscious of this too, that we're using the anthology to showcase what we do in the creative writing program. So while we've been very hands-off as academic supervisors, we've always encouraged the editorial teams to look for creative non-fiction, example, because students tend to want to write fiction and poetry, and script writing, and scripts are very hard to put in an anthology because they're usually far too long, but we've always tried really hard to encourage the editorial committee to look for scripts that could be there in the book, again, you know, to help showcase to the world what it is we do here in the creative writing program.
No, definitely. And it does a great job at that. For the writers on the panel, I'd love to know what your experience was, or your memories of being in the anthology. Was it a first publication? Did it lead to anything? Just that kind of personal history that you might have had with your experiences.
So for me, it's actually quite personal the way it was for you, Zahid. So I don't know if you've read my piece, but it's kind of like a coming out letter. And I remember when I had to workshop it in Delia's class, it was absolutely petrifying. I remember reading it and thinking, what if someone from high school reads this? What if someone from primary school reads this? What happens when my parents have to read this? My dad is here tonight. But it was absolutely terrifying. And doing the workshop actually really helps, because people laughed when I didn't realize it was funny, and people would say, this part is really great. And I think I ended up publishing it very closely to how I workshopped it in Delia's class. And I hope that answered your question.
Perfect, yeah. For you, Patty, was there the first publication?
Well, yes, there was the student magazine newspaper called Newswit, and I think there was 3 or 4 stories that I had in that as well. But there was in Pink Cakes, there was the book Pink Cakes, and there was another one which was a bit more sort of postmodern kind of thing, with various levels of kind of interrogation of the idea of messages. You very wisely picked the more straightforward Pink Cakes one, I think. But as I said before, you know, the whole first book came out of that particular story. So it was, you know, a very kind of shaping kind of influence for me. And as Sydney said, having your stories sort of workshopped. And I mean, it seems odd to me now, you know, that sort of young woman in her early 20s was writing about kind of great aunts from the early kind of, probably they would have been young in the you know, 1920s. It seems odd now, but I think I was just fascinated by what kind of imaginary lives they must have had, because, you know, the last one who remembers was the name of the book, and I thought, when they die, and the last one who remembers them dies, then no one will know they even existed. So it's kind of about that possibility of recreating people's lives, I guess, which is what I went on to do more in nonfiction.
Yeah, definitely. Zahid, you've published a lot of stories after the anthology. Was that experience formative and help you go on to work those other stories?
Yeah, I think so. I think I'd published a couple of things maybe in the you know, the UTS newspaper prior to this, but this was the first, you know, real publication that I think I'd had. And I actually wrote the story in a subject called fictocritical writing, which I don't know if that still exists, but yeah, which I loved, because I'm the laziest writer in the world. And I thought, fantastic, I don't have to do as much research, because it can be 50% fiction and 50% essay. And that's what this came out of. And actually reading it, one of the things I remembered is that, I mean, this is again, back in the old days, I worked at a video store, and we didn't have any customers. It was the dying days of Howard and the dying days of DVD. And I was sitting there, and the last section I actually wrote in the video store, and I remember the person about whom I wrote it. So yeah, it was fun.
Amazing, amazing. A final question for everyone. So it's incredible that this anthology has been around for 40 years now, like absolutely astonishing, really. Where would you like to see Australian writing go across the next 40 years? And if that's too ambitious, you can answer that by letting us know what you are working on now and where you'd like to see your writing go.
I suppose I'd like to see I think as everyone would, more diverse voices being represented in Australian fiction, and also more diverse stories being written. And I think we're seeing that at the moment coming through. So there is, it feels like we're in a state of flux and change. And, I'm working on a novel at the moment that doesn't fit neatly into any category. So part of my hope is a selfish one, that they'll find a slot where they can put this in. So yeah, that's what I'd hope for.
I think I'd like to see more acknowledgement and maybe more prizes for creative nonfiction, because it's an area quite specific, and in the various Premier's prizes, it's kind of lumped in with all the other nonfiction, about worthy kind of sort of prime ministers and all that kind of thing. So I'd like there to be more kind of acknowledgement of creative nonfiction. And again, like I said, it's selfish because that's the area that I'm working in, and my latest book is coming out in March next year, which is about true friends, supposedly.
And that's the title too, True Friends. So check it out. Deborah or Sydney?
Well, I've looking through the anthologies over the years, it's clear that it has become much more diverse and inclusive, and partly that's because UTS is a very inclusive university, or always has been. And I think that it would be wonderful if in years to come there was no Anglo name in the anthology at all.
I think it's interesting you say that. I have actually complained on Twitter about this before, but there were times at UTS during my master's where I was the only person of color in the room, which would make me feel incredibly uncomfortable. And there were times where the entire reading list was all white males, and the lecturer would just not notice that that was the case. So I do think like a more diverse...
I hope that wasn't me.
But I do think a more diverse anthology would be incredible, like with disabled writers, but you need to see those students in the classroom to be able to get that. I mean, seeing Indigenous works would be incredible. I don't think there were any in the anthologies I was published in anyway.
Definitely. And what are you working on, Sydney? What's next?
I got a fellowship with Penguin Random House about a year and a half ago, and I'm writing a young adult story called The Spider and Her Demons, which is about a Chinese spider demon living above a dumpling shop with her aunt, and everything's going fine. Nobody knows who she is until she's caught eating a man by the most popular girl in school. Everybody always laughs when I tell them that, but it's not a funny story. It's actually horrifying.
It's laughter from fear.
Sounds fantastic.
And it actually sounds like the future of Australian writing. So I'm going to hit stop and say, I did it. We did it. That was 27 minutes. So we get a Guinness World Record, I think. So please thank all of the panelists.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you so much, panel and Sam. That was such a brilliant representation of everything that the anthology is and has been. Just the sort of passionate connection between writing and workshopping, and then actually seeing it in the world when we pick it up. It's lovely to have that behind the scenes view. Really extraordinary. It's now time to announce next year's editorial committee, who again will be so wisely, enthusiastically and unstintingly led by Dr. Claire Corbett, author and lecturer in creative writing. So over to you, Claire. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Sydney, I remember the Spider Demon novel very well. You did, and it'll be great to see it when it comes out. It's my very great pleasure and honour to select and then work with the anthology committees, the annual ones over the last couple of years. And so it's now my pleasure to announce our wonderful editors for 2022. And they are Charles Malikan, Pierce Hadjinakola, Erin Vincent, Ben Lee, Carly Bertuccio and Nikki Byrne. So congratulations to all of you. I very much look forward to working with you. And a dear colleague of mine who shall remain nameless was not a fan of working with semicolons with UTS students, but I believe in you and I know that I can teach you how to use semicolons. So, sure.
So Claire and I are doing a double act now as the evening winds up. We are going to present the annual UTS Anthology Award, which is chosen by creative writing staff to honour the best work selected in each year's anthology. So that this is for this year. The awards are for Bloom, and there are 2 highly commended ones and 1 Winners Award, all sponsored by the Dean's Unit. So.
Thank you, Anna. And I can promise you that none of the people whose names I'm about to read out have any idea. And I am so excited about this. I'm really, really excited. So the 2 highly commended in no particular order, I would now like to call to the stage Hugh McGonigal, highly commended. For his short story, The Dinner Party. No.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes. Oh, yes. Next, I would like to call Natia Santos for her poem sequence, Vivat Crescat Floriat, May it live, grow and flourish. Now, drum roll. The winner of the UTS Writers Anthology Prize for 2021 is, and how far it has come, a piece of creative nonfiction by Mike Dolan for his essay Guiding Light. And now we have a couple of other. Oh, okay. We've got a couple of other presentations as well. Yeah. So I know that we have a couple of more small presentations. Yes? It's coming. And they're, yes, so they're flowers for Anna and also for our panelists. Ah, of course. Yeah. Oh, nice. Got something for the panel. And we also have something for the wonderful James Liu, who's worked so hard all this year to make all of this happen. Thank you, James. Thank you.
I try to get rid of you with flowers, but it doesn't work. I'm still here. Yes, I'd like to say congratulations to the winners of those prizes, and in fact to everybody published in those anthologies. On behalf of the editors and creative writing staff, there are some people to thank. So I extend our thanks to all the supporters of the anthology and the writing program over these many, many years. And in particular tonight to David Henley and Alice Grundy and the team at Brio Books, now part of Booktopia, for not only designing such beautiful books, but also for their generous mentorship of our editors over the last decade. Thank you. Also to this year's volunteer editorial teams. I've never been on one of these, but I am getting a picture of the enormous amount of work in a short amount of time that goes on. So thank you very much. To James, again, James Liu, Business Development Manager and Marketing and Communications Manager. It couldn't happen without you. Thank you. And also to the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences for their sponsorship both of the anthologies and of tonight's event. So thanks to the faculty. Lastly, I'd like to thank all of you here and virtually on screen for being here and celebrating with us. It's been a really wonderful evening. In a moment, I'm going to invite you to keep drinking and eating in the foyer. But first, a couple of housekeeping things. If you would like to buy further copies of the anthology, they are available from Booktopia via a link provided on your invitations. Please also take your time outside to have a look at the exhibition for Bloom, which is in the Great Hall. It's been put together by the UTS Library. So now it's a bit like launching a ship, I think. In conclusion, it's my pleasure to declare Bloom and 40 years of the UTS Writers Anthology launched. Thank you for joining us. Good afternoon.